We're live.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alice Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Director of External Affairs, and I'll just be today's moderator for the pre-bid for sustainability services. Can we go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint? Next slide, please. I'm going to run through the agenda today. So first we'll have a project overview from Meg Cederoff, who's our Director of Planning and Sustainability. Then Ashley Missler will give us a small business program overview. Meg will join us again and do the procurement overview. And then Tanya Southern will give us the organizational conflict of interest overview as well. Next slide, please. All right, let's just talk about some of the online resources available. There's the link there to the Sustainability Services webpage. If you go to our homepage, hsr.ca.gov, then business opportunities, and then listed under contractors, you'll see sustainability services. That webpage will include, when this pre-bid is concluded, a video, this PowerPoint, a list of all those that registered for the pre-bid, any responses to questions that we've received, and any updates regarding the request for qualification. You can submit your questions to sustain@hsr.ca.gov, and all those questions are going to be due by December 12th. Okay, thank you. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Meg.
Thank you very much, Alice, and it's a pleasure to join everyone virtually this morning and give a brief overview of the project and the program. So next slide. By way of introduction, I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability. I'll be talking about this procurement in a little bit more detail a little bit later on in this webinar, but I wanted to provide you first with an overview of the entire program for those not familiar with California High-Speed Rail. The mission of the California High-Speed Rail Authority is to initiate construction of a high-speed train system utilizing a dedicated alignment and technology capable of sustaining speeds of greater than 200 miles per hour. This is incredibly important because this is bringing the speed of an airplane to ground-based transportation that's interlinked in the downtowns of our major cities in California. The authority is actively engaged in phase one, environmentally clearing detailed project segments from San Francisco all the way to the Los Angeles Anaheim Basin. That's about 494, or sometimes we shorten that to just say 500 miles of alignment. And this is an alignment that was not just kind of naturally connecting the population centers of California, but has also been baked into our existing, our enabling statutes, which are Prop 1A. But we have also looked at and have done programmatic clearance of phase two, which extends the system up to Sacramento and down to San Diego. We are dedicated and focused on getting electrified high-speed rail service up as soon as possible, and are focused across the entire alignment, making sure that we are capable of speeds greater than 200 miles an hour, which depends upon an incredibly straight and fast alignment, and also depends upon grade separations and a new alignment that's entirely separated from freight traffic as well. Next slide. We've actually focused very much over the past several years on an initial operating segment between the city of Merced and the city of Bakersfield. This is 171 miles of, again, dedicated high-speed passenger rail service between these two cities, with stops in Fresno and Kings Tulare, as well as another station identified by the State Rail Plan in Madera. We've cleared this entire project segment and already have 119 miles of this project in construction, with the first chunk of that construction scheduled to finish in early 2023. We've also started advancing design on an additional 52 miles, extending the system between Madera and Merced, and then down into Bakersfield. We've also initiated design for 4 Central Valley stations: Merced, Fresno, Kings Tulare, and Bakersfield. We'll be moving forward with the procurement of our trackway and systems, as well as rail procurement in 2023. The goal for all of these elements is to have passenger service in operation by 2030. Next slide. we're still making very aggressive and concurrent investments in both Northern California and Southern California, as I'll detail here. The valley to valley segment is what we call an extension of service up into the San Francisco area. We've already committed funds to the electrification of the Caltrain corridor between San Francisco and San Jose. We've already environmentally cleared this entire 159 miles, or we could call it 160, segment between San Francisco and what we call a Y segment in that sort of Carlucci Road area. This, if we receive additional federal funding, it's eligible to begin advanced design in later 2022 or 2023. And as I noted, we've already dedicated funds and have the Caltrain system has been electrifying their corridor between San Francisco and San Jose. Our goal here is to keep advancing design in 2023 and to identify opportunities for shared corridor early capital investments, as well as developing funding plan options in this corridor. Next slide. In Southern California, we have completed nearly half of all of the environmental clearance necessary for this entire segment between Palmdale and between Bakersfield and Palmdale, and then between Burbank and Los Angeles. The Southern California team is still very hard at work on completing the environmental clearance between Palmdale and Burbank, and then further down into Anaheim. The goal for 2023 here is to complete all environmental work, as well as to advance projects to which we've dedicated funding, including the LA Union Station Phase A improvements, which have been funded through Prop 1A, funded through authority funds, and look for other early capital investments that help to advance this corridor and make it ready for high-speed rail service as soon as possible. Next slide. Just a little bit about the program, and this also touches on sustainability, which is a core part of the high-speed rail delivery. We are very focused on how the program is advancing opportunities for good paying jobs. And since the beginning of construction, there have been more than 9,300 jobs created. That's more than 1,000 construction workers who are dispatched to sites every day across 34 active construction sites. And this includes laborers who live in California designated disadvantaged communities, which is a critical metric for the authority to keep track of and keep focusing benefits on. We've also had more than 739 small businesses employed to work on the project. 237 of these are disadvantaged business enterprise, and another 90 are disabled veterans enterprises. And this contract, the procurement we'll be reviewing today, also includes small business requirements, as will be detailed by my colleague Ashley. The authority is incredibly focused and very dedicated to leading in sustainability. The authority board of directors required the system, or made a policy goal, to run the system entirely on 100% renewable energy back in 2008, well in advance of the more aggressive statewide net zero carbon goals that California has been focused on. But by the same token, we don't just want to wait for sustainability outcomes in operation. We are very focused on how the system in delivery can advance and really move the needle on business as usual practices and move those very aggressively towards sustainability outcomes. So to that end, we require the use of Tier 4 equipment for off-road equipment across all of the construction projects that we touched on earlier. We also focus very much on the benefit of the system in terms of sustainability metrics, one of which is to reduce vehicle miles traveled, which involves mode shift from both automobiles and airplanes onto high-speed rail. And if you look at the overall VMT benefit of the system, it's a lot like taking about more than 400,000 cars off the road annually. Next slide. I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Ashley, and she'll be going over the small business program in much more detail.
Thank you, Meg, and good morning, everyone. I am Ashley Missler, and as Meg had mentioned prior to this, I oversee the small business program and will be your point of contact for all your small business needs. My contact information is listed on the bottom of the slide. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as many of you are aware, the authority has a very aggressive 30% overall small business goal. 10% of that is for disadvantaged business enterprises and 3% is for disabled veteran businesses enterprise. We already have a good number of businesses that are performing on the contract, a total of 739 that you'll see here that come from all over the state. On the map, it kind of designates where they are essentially located. And then we also have about 25 small businesses that are from outside of the state. So in order to meet your goal and in accordance to the SB program, you'll need to designate a small business officer that is responsible for being the point of contact for all things small business related. And that person will essentially work closely with my team. For example, if there's a need to host a workshop, or if you'd like to garner interest on any procurements that you're going to be putting out or any task orders that need completed, it is very important that you will follow that protocol for adding each of those small businesses to your project and that you're utilizing a small business that has been approved to work on the project. So if you're looking for more businesses to do work on the project, you can leverage my team and they will be happy to partner with you and do workshops and try to help you find those qualified businesses to perform on the contract. Next slide, please. Okay. So the authority committed to a diversity, but we're not a certifying agency. We actually partner with a couple different agencies in order to utilize their certification designations, as you'll see listed on this slide here. Anytime you want to bring a business on board, they'll have to be certified with these departments here, and their certification must be current and valid the duration of the contract. You'll want to make sure that throughout their time on the small business that these small businesses are performing on your contract, that their certifications are continuously up to date and don't lapse. Many of these certifications here carry about a 1 to 2 year term before they have to renew, but it's their responsibility to make sure that these certifications are current. So with that being said, the California Department of General Services, DGS, offers the small business certification, microbusiness MB certification, and then the new Small Business Public Works SBPW, which includes firms who specifically work on public work contracts. These are generally larger firms that graduated out of the smaller program. So if you have firms that you have worked with on this project in the past that grew and exceeded that small business dollar threshold and they're no longer qualified, the SBPW actually goes up to 36 million gross annual receipts and they could still qualify as a small business. DGS lastly offers the DVBE certification. And then the next bracket here we have that you see on the slide is the California Unified Certification Program, the CUF, which is a disadvantaged enterprise program that offered throughout California. Primarily, Caltrans offers this statewide certification, but there are other agencies that also offer the cert. The statewide certification is actually something that's self-certifiable, so you can probably get that in a day or so, but the CUPC takes longer. So if you have any firms that are trying to join your team with this certification, just let them know that it takes about 6 months to get certified. And then lastly, the last bullet on the slide here, we accept the 8A Disadvantaged Business Program certification, and that comes from the U.S. Small Business Certification. And also the last bullet, which is the service disabled veteran owned small business. That's a mouthful. So please keep in mind that anything that's federal is going to take a little bit longer to process, but these certifications that we list here are the only certifications that we accept, and they do have to be certified at the time they're brought onto the contract, during execution, also during the duration of the contract. Next slide, please. So exclusivity. HSR has no prohibition against subconsultants or subcontractors being exclusive to one offeror or the next, but we do strongly discourage this practice for SB, DBE, and DBBE subs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide covers the Connect HSR vendor registry. We encourage all businesses to register with Connect HSR. It's free, it's online, and very simple to complete. If you send your business to this site to register, they will always be notified of any opportunities and workshops on the project. Oftentimes we find that businesses are struggling with certain things, so we'll hold like special events or educational workshops and partner with other agencies like Department of General Services, Department of Industrial Relations, Caltrans, to do different workshops on, prompt payment, certified payroll. We might host a workshop on how to do business with the state. So there's all different kinds of opportunities that would bring you your business on the project and learn about HSR and kind of how we do business here. And then also just joint industry information that's going to be listed on the site. So things that come from the governor's office that we want to share, or other agencies, we use this database to let the community know and keep them informed. So with that, I'd like to encourage you to get those small businesses to register and join Connect HSR. And if you need any more information on getting registered, just please reach out to my team or me, and I will put you in contact with someone from my team that can help you with that process. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to hand you back to Meg. And if you have any questions for the small business program, you can please reach out to me on that first slide where my email was listed, hsr.sbprogram@hsr.ca.gov. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Ashley. So as I stated earlier, I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability. And we've been very hard at work for more than a decade, really establishing a sustainability program for the authority that is a reflection of the ambition and the requirements of such a large program of mega projects. And so I want to touch briefly on an overview of that program and then talk in more detail about the sustainability services that we are seeking through this request for qualifications. So let's go to the next slide. We've had, and I'll just go over the authority's sustainability program in a little bit of detail. So next slide. The authorities had a sustainability policy going back to sort of 2013, but over the years, we have periodically updated that policy, and it was last adopted by our board of directors in 2019. The policy is very much a reflection, not just of how detailed we want to approach each of the sustainability elements, as well as consisting of specific requirements and commitments that the board has made, but also really illustrates that at a very high level, our policy is to serve as a model for sustainable rail infrastructure. We realize that we have a duty to use this delivery of a mega project to not just achieve sustainability as an outcome, but in delivery start to adapt and evolve practices relative to construction that really speak to advancing sustainability principles for the state of California and for the authority. So to that end, the policy, while being very high level, does contain a number of very specific and ambitious commitments and speaks to how we use sustainability across the entirety of delivery, from planning, siting, designing, construction, mitigation, all the way through maintenance, as well as across all of the different functional areas. Next slide. We have taken a very hard look and will continually look at how we approach sustainability and make sure we continue to maintain a very clear organizational structure around sustainability. On the slide here, you'll see the 5 major areas that form the framework for how we approach sustainability across the entire program: economic development and governance, energy and emissions, natural resources, sustainable infrastructure, and station communities and riderships. These are 5 very large, very broad categories underneath which we organize a set of core activities to make sure we stay on plan and focus across the organization around sustainability. You'll see these, I'm sure people who approach sustainability across many different types of projects have various structures they use around the notion of sustainability for our program. These resonate specifically with us as a rail mega project. Next slide. The authority's board of directors and executive leadership are very clear leaders on the topic of sustainability, and we've had several public policy leading commitments that have guided our work and our activity. As I mentioned previously, in 2008, our board committed us to running the system entirely on renewable energy. And as you'll see in the scope of work for this RFQ, the consultant we bring on board through this request for qualifications will assist us with finalizing the details and approach for our renewable energy operations. We've been incorporated into a range of statewide plans relative to achieving state sustainability goals, including the ARB's scoping plan, as well as climate adaptation and state rail plan activities as well. And to that end, we use our sustainability approaches to advance on state goals as well. We've committed the system to be zero net direct greenhouse gas emissions for construction, which means we've set a boundary around the direct emissions from our construction activities and have identified initial projects and need to identify further projects that can be done that will offset or sequester carbon in an equal amount to what we anticipate producing through those direct emissions. We also have a zero net air quality emissions for construction commitment for the project. Again, we're speaking to those direct emissions from construction of the project, and then looking to projects that directly offset equal or net zero amounts of criteria air pollution. To that end, when you have such clear goals relative to construction activities, it does help guide our promises and commitments. We have a proactive set of construction requirements, and will continue to advance these and monitor these construction requirements relative to Tier 4 vehicles as well as zero emissions vehicles. And we've required 100% of the concrete and the steel from construction be recycled, and are now at an 85% of the remaining categories of non-hazardous waste to be recycled. We were also one of the first infrastructure projects to require disclosure documents around major materials, because we respect that there is another boundary of carbon emissions when it comes to constructing the project. So to that end, back in 2014, we required disclosure. And as California has advanced statute relative to embodied carbon and materials, we have also looked to our contract provisions and contractor requirements in order to advance reductions in embodied carbon as well. I think this slide speaks very clearly to the idea of continuous improvements. And so you'll note that while we've required disclosure, now we are moving towards actually requiring performance targets and thresholds relative to embodied energy for concrete and steel that will be used in construction moving forward. We've looked at our source of emissions in construction and recognize that on-road fleets are a very clear area where we have an opportunity to reduce emissions. And so we've required zero emissions fleets for upcoming construction contracts. We also have identified a specific target and budget for future contracts relative to greenhouse gas emissions in construction, so that we're sharing the approach to reducing emissions with the contractor, and we've tied that to a bonus and a penalty. So to that, not just on our construction projects are we focused, we're also focused across the program on climate adaptation techniques that can be brought to bear. And we have, as I mentioned, focused on zero emissions for on-road fleets in future contracts. So this is a taster of some of the ambitious and comprehensive holistic requirements we've made and commitments we've made for the program. Let's move on to the next slide. And we'll talk very specifically about this contract, which does bring to the table the supporting core services and technical approaches that help us to be either establishing goals, tracking goals, or creating requirements. So next slide. This is a request for qualifications, and through this solicitation, we want to bring one firm into the authority that will provide the technical support, the guidance, and the administrative support on a range of sustainability topics that I've touched on, specific not just to delivery, but also operations, and including technical plans and studies. So this proposed contract will replace the existing set of consultants who are assisting the authority with sustainability services. These were previously performed by the authority's rail delivery partner. And as I noted, these services are crucial to us in terms of maintaining compliance writ large with statutory requirements, but also helping us with climate adaptation, implementation, and analysis, and performing oversight of construction activities and sustainability compliance in construction, as well as reporting for the authority. Next slide. I'm going to touch on the major areas of scope that this consultant will be focused on and the services that we're asking for qualifications against. So next slide. Just a bit of contract overview. The overall budget is $11.7 million, and this is meant to cover an initial 3-year contract term plus 2 one-year extensions. So we anticipate this contract, the initial part of this contract between 2023 and 2026, and then, as I noted, 2 one-year extensions are included in the contract. Next slide. This is a high-level overview of the essential technical skill sets that we're seeking qualifications against. And you can see this speaks to a number of those commitments I was touching on earlier. So we'll be looking for consultants who can provide renewable energy planning, financial analysis, battery storage, cost estimating of behind-the-meter resources such as batteries and solar, as well as support reviewing various tariff structures and support to the authority in implementing our renewable energy operations activities. We also want this consultant to bring to the table extensive and detailed experience relative to climate change modeling, a high degree of comfort with the variety of climate models, as well as how to downscale those for California and to then telescope them into analysis for a project of this scale. We also want our consultants to be conversant with risk analysis, as well as adaptive design and planning techniques. This consultant will be specifically performing air quality compliance modeling for our construction so that we have a baseline of activities to date and can use that to show what is happening in construction as we move forward across the 171 miles of construction. This consultant will also be responsible for assembling air quality data submitted monthly from the contractor and assembling that into a quarterly report to both regional and state level stakeholders. This consultant will also be responsible for the range of greenhouse gas emissions modeling and forecasting that the authority undertakes, including looking at our annual ridership and operations data to project greenhouse gas emissions reductions associated with the system. This consultant will be looking at innovation, technical advances, as well as emerging protocols to determine what are some of the more appealing and useful carbon offset techniques that the authority can deploy in order to meet its net zero carbon and air quality emissions goals I spoke to earlier. And last but not least, this consultant will be working with us to assemble data that supports the authority's annual sustainability report. We think that reporting is an incredibly important part of transparency. Transparency is a critical component of sustainability. We annually undertake this reporting against ESG indicators and make sure that the report conforms to global standards. Next slide. These next few slides actually tease out in a fairly extensive detail what we're looking for in terms of activities and qualifications. These are the tasks that this consultant or groups of consultants will undertake to deliver. We've included project management and administrative type activities, which is understandable given the size and scale of this contract. I also did want to emphasize here that these services will be employed across the entirety of the high-speed rail program, so across the statewide system and the organization, as well as very focused on our ongoing construction activities. So to that end, you'll see things I touched on in the earlier slide are support relative to renewable energy, climate change adaptation, as well as modeling and mitigation, sustainability planning and strategy activities, including supporting the authority in maintaining our Envision Platinum award with the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure. We've received a programmatic designation of platinum for the entire program, but that is dependent upon us continuing to supply detailed submittals relative to ongoing construction activities and environmental planning works. Next slide. Additional scope of services include, as I noted, our sustainability report. This is a very crucial activity we undertake annually. We've also been using the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark for infrastructure for some time, although we are considering the utility of this and other types of annual benchmarks, but we will continue to maintain a GRI standard framework for reporting. As I noted, our air quality monitoring and reporting that this consultant will oversee is very specific to the ongoing construction activities. We expect a high degree of fluency and comfort with air quality monitoring, field monitoring, as well as clear experience with maintaining reporting with the local air basins. This consultant will also work with us very closely on tree planting or other types of carbon offsetting activities. We're also open to and want to explore different innovations relative to carbon sequestration. And then finally, this consultant will support the authority very directly in our monthly reporting from a range of contracts. And all of that is assembled in a database tool called Environmental Monitoring and Management, or EMMA. So this consultant will be working very, very closely with the authority in terms of conforming those data submittals and reviewing and conforming those data submittals. Next slide. This is a little bit on the process. We released the RFQ last week. We'll be taking questions or questions relative to the RFQ through December 12th. This is a qualifications-based procurement, so the actual contract amount will be negotiated with the highest scoring offer, and our recommendation will be made to the CEO for consideration to award. The evaluation is a two-step process, so it involves the review of statements of qualifications, or SOQs, which my colleague will kindly remind me the date for which those SOQs are due. And then after a review and an evaluation of the SOQs, we will be identifying a set for discussions or interviews. We've also required that our offerers submit, and this will not be a surprise given that we are looking for sustainability services, this offer will be required to submit ESG efforts, including environmental sustainability, socioeconomic equity policies, governance policies, and these are required as a pass-fail element for all submittals. We are also asking that the offerers demonstrate that they have set environmental targets for their firms and have identified both carbon emissions and climate risk evaluations for their own firms. And then, as my colleague Ashley detailed, we have a small business utilization requirement as well. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Tanya Southern, who will be filling you in on a number of the details relative to organizational conflict of interest.
Thank you, Meg. I am Tanya Southern. I'm an attorney with the California High-Speed Rail, and I'm going to provide just a brief overview of our organizational conflicts of interest policy and how it's applied. Next slide, please. A lot of people without working with high-speed rail before may ask, why do you need an organizational conflict of interest? First, it's a policy that we were required to adopt in compliance with many of our federal grants. It also ensures compliance with state and federal procurement laws and regulations. And we also hope that it shows all potential bidders or offerers out there that we have a fair and transparent procurement process, and it maximizes competition and minimizes exposure to bid protests. There's a plethora of case law out there, and we have quoted just one of the seminal cases by the U.S. Supreme Court on the subject of conflicts of interest. And it's not necessarily that there's an actual conflict, but a perceived, or at least an ability to have an impairment of judgment. That is one of the concerns that is addressed by this policy. Next slide. The definition of an organizational conflict of interest is very important, and it's in our policy. And it says that it's defined as a circumstance arising out of a contractor's existing or past activities, business or financial interests, familiar relationships, contractual relationships, and or organizational structure, i.e. if you have a parent entity, a subsidiary, affiliates, and those interests would result in impairment or potential impairment of a contractor's ability to render impartial assistance or advice to the authority, or of its objectivity in performing the work that it's required to perform for the authority. An unfair competitive advantage is also a conflict of interest for any contractor who is bidding or proposing or submitting a statement of qualifications for an authority procurement. And lastly, it's also a perception or an appearance of impropriety with respect to any of the authority's procurements or contracts. And the perception or appearance of unfair competitive advantage with respect to the procurement and follow-on contract. And it's regardless of whether the perception is accurate. Next slide, please. Organizational conflicts of interest. There's a lot of ways, and we've given some examples in our policy, but two of the most, I'd say, prolific or general situations where there can be an organizational conflict of interest are found when a contractor has an unfair competitive advantage. We have an example where a contractor has inside or non-public information about a procurement. That's why oftentimes we will try to ensure that there are links to documents or documents provided with the procurement that go to any non-public information. Like Meg was talking about, our sustainability reports, things that could be of value when you're submitting an offer on this procurement. Another example is if a contractor provides services related to the procurement and then submits a statement of qualifications on it. So in this case, you have someone working on the procurement. Obviously, they're going to have inside information and have information that non-public entities would not have. So we want to make sure that you don't work on a procurement and then bid on it. That's one of the fundamental issues that would always result in a conflict of interest, and we always avoid it. And the last example is when a contractor's objectivity is in performing its contractual obligations would be compromised. So the example we've given here is a contractor is on contract A, and it's in a position to oversee its own work on another contract we have, or contract B, and we can't mitigate it. So you can't be in a position to oversee your own work. And that's another organizational conflict of interest that can't be mitigated against. And just, we have a note here that courts are very differential to public agency decisions on conflicts unless the agency acted in an arbitrary or capricious manner, if we abuse our discretion or acted illegally. And that's just for the lawyers to always keep in mind. Next slide, please. We do have flexibility in our organizational conflict of interest policy. It states that the authority recognizes that its goals must be balanced against the need to not unnecessarily restrict the pool of potential proposers or bidders or offerers, as in this procurement, available to participate in the authority procurements and contracts. In this case, when we can mitigate, if a potential conflict is recognized, the policy requires us to consider numerous factors to determine whether the contractor may participate in the contract and whether mitigation or safeguards can be implemented in order to permit participation. In the past, we've enacted many mitigation measures where it is possible. Such safeguards are commonly applied, and they're allowed to increase participation, and they include measures like ethical walls, release of work product, or where certain of the contractor's employees do not work on the other contract, or have interaction between the contracts. And the last one we have is the vast majority of conflict determinations for an organizational conflict of interest determines that a contractor may participate in the desired procurement and or contract. Next slide, please. How do you request an organizational conflict of interest determination? They're not required for you to submit a statement of qualifications for this, but they are encouraged, especially if you have a current contract and you would be seeking a second contract working for the authority. The RFQ, or request for qualifications, has this section. So if you don't retain it, it will be in the RFQ, but they will go to our chief counsel, who is Alicia Fowler, and it's at this email. It's legal@highspeedrail or hsr.ca.gov. And we do request that you reference the RFQ, which would be the sustainability RFQ for this case. The next step after you submit is we will review the request. Likely we do request, even if you provide information, in order to make sure we have all the facts and information and documentation, we usually send out a request to ensure that we have everything. And then we, based upon that, we perform an investigation and analysis and include potential mitigation options, just as we discussed before. And we would also review our policy and ensure compliance. This is performed by attorneys at the authority, including myself and others on our legal team. The requester will often be asked, as I said, for additional information, and but as much as possible, especially if you've been through this before, upfront really helps. After we receive all the information and have finalized our review, the chief counsel, Alicia Fowler, makes the final determination, and we will send you a letter signed by chief counsel that discusses all of the relevant facts and applicable policy provisions, so you'll understand why we made the determination that we did. Lastly, if a requester has questions or doesn't agree, we do encourage you to contact the chief counsel to raise additional information, relevant facts, and we will always take that into account to ensure that we have all of the information and that the determination is equitable and fair. Next slide. With that, I'm going to send it back, I think, to Alice for the closing.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Ashley and Meg. Just to wrap things up here on this last slide, any questions you have regarding the procurement, send those to sustain@hsr.ca.gov. Those questions are due by December 12th. And any responses to questions, registrant list, the pre-bid video and PowerPoint, and any updates to the RFQ will be posted on that website. Again, to get to it, it's pretty easy. Go to our homepage, hsr.ca.gov, select business opportunities, and then under contractors, you'll see sustainability services there. Okay, and that's going to wrap us up, I believe. Thank you, everyone.